We're all waiting for Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Ever since the primordial times of the 1990s, when 3D games were shown to not only be possible, but actually halfway decent, sorry 3D Monster Maze fans, we've all dreamed of seeing Kirby not only moving left, right, up and down, but also diagonally. That said though, there's another thing people have wanted to see Kirby become for a long time, and that in itself is difficult. And that's to give this video a big like and a comment, while also ringing the notification bell after subscribing to help me reach my year-end goal of 2,500 subs. Thank you. Part of the whole point of Kirby is that the games are easy for those just looking for a good time, but become much more involved and tricky for those willing to dive deep. But for many, that wasn't enough. People just want a Kirby game that's actually tough as nails, holds nothing back, and is longer than 4 levels long. And for you guys, I've got good news. Kirby Revenge of Dreamland has finally been released with the exact intent of being a difficult Kirby game. But is it the good, rewarding kind of hard that pushes your skills to their absolute limit with fair but insane challenges? Or is it stupid and dumb like this game? Some things to note before we get started today. First, I am reviewing the initial version of this game. I am aware that it can be patched, and this is just based on what I actually played myself. Second, you may have noticed that the footage can get pretty laggy and sometimes blurry, putting it nicely. I played this on my Nintendo PC, and I streamed it. Follow my Twitch channel, thanks, love you guys. And my computer had a hard time running some of it. And after my first time I forgot to record it, I had to download the Twitch recording, and that did not turn up so good. I don't recommend playing it like this, but I'm also aware that it's my fault, not really the devs or anything like that, literally at all. Lastly, if you're a channel familiar and you're not totally sure what's up with my voice just yet, check the pinned comment, and that's all I'm going to say on that note. On with the show! Before we actually talk about the changes made, I think it's important that we talk about what wasn't changed. Least surprising, the story has received absolutely no changes. Kirby's living in their Squeak Squad years. Magolor crash lands, Kirby and friends pay him an unfathomable amount of money for gem apples. Magolor, spoilers, I guess, uses his riches to try and destroy the universe, except he doesn't because Kirby is stronger than a god. The end. A lot around the story has changed, but that still doesn't quite mean everything. Puzzles aside, the level design is exactly the same as you remember. Not all of the puzzles were modified either, but enough of them were to the point where you're always thinking, I wonder if they changed this. Well, there are some other things you'll be thinking about, but during the downtime, it's an exciting process, wondering what brand new things you could maybe find in this 10-year-old game. The copyability challenge stages and the mini-games were also totally untouched, as were most aspects of the copy abilities. Well, most. I will definitely be getting into that later. So at points, it can feel very similar to Vanilla Return to Dreamland, but of course, if that were the case, I wouldn't be making an entire video about this, right? There is differences aplenty, and it's about time that we finally get into those. After fighting Doomer Team, you fight Master Doomer and Crazy Doomer. That was the Grand Doomer fight. Basically, that was the Grand Doomer fight. Like, why? Why do this to me, chat? You're making everything so hard. The most immediate difference to note is that Kirby's Dreamland Extra Mode style, enemies move and attack much faster, dealing more damage and having more range on their attacks. They also tend to choose violence much quicker than normally. As of the very first level, this Sir Kibble will throw out a blade almost as soon as he pops on screen, which results in levels that, while mostly the same in terms of design, are much harder to get through. But, as I'm sure anyone who's played a Kirby game before is thinking, that's cool, but you can just smack the normal enemies and get a move on, right? It isn't quite so easy here, since enemies are now rocking some pretty chunky health bars. It's nothing insane, they don't have mini-boss health or anything like that, but it takes a couple of hits of a reasonably strong attack in order to take down a lot of the enemies, and because of how much more ferocious these monsters are, simply running past them doesn't always cut it. My first playthrough was obviously very casual, but I found myself engaging in combat more than pretty much any other Kirby game, at least those that don't force it often, because the enemies were actual threats. The same philosophy applies to the mini-bosses too, but if the regular enemies were dialed up to 11, these toughies were dialed up to 11 times 11. New attacks, stronger hits, beefier health bars, and in some cases, crazy new phases that, while they made my laptop explode repeatedly, really surprised me in how this was even made possible. All around, even with the same levels, this still feels like a different experience from the original game. All of the praise I smack on Dreamland 1, I give here. Moundo is an obvious standout, but I also really like Water Galbaros, like every Kirby speedrunner does, of course, but also because I like the changes made here. Having a splash attack when landing, all of the standard changes you see across boss fights, and the attack just being crazy in general. Fights like King Dew and Gigant Edge have fun new additions too, but the Water Galbaros, and especially Moundo, have to be my favorites. Seriously, I love basically every addition to Moundo, and this fight is just an absolute blast. But if you thought they were cool, the actual bosses that you fight along the way, they're dialed up to 11 times 11 times 11 again. As soon as I fought Wispy Woods and he pulled out the Rainbow Curse shenanigans, where he changes himself to Metal Woods and you can't hurt him normally, I freaked. Rainbow Curse isn't the most amazing game ever or anything, but it is such a fun, natural nod to that game that translated perfectly to the Return to Dreamland engine, and that it resulted in a really fun and inventive battle. While none of the other boss fights really got nods to previous games, of course, they all got some very beefy health bars and lots of new, strong attacks that kept me on my toes. Fatty Puffer took me forever to get used to, since he got Water Galbaros' landing splash attack, and my small speedrunner brain is specifically hardwired to do nothing but spam Parasol Twirl in this battle. Goliath, on the other hand, just went absolutely insane, with the speed of his attacks just being absolutely crazy. Unlike Fatty Puffer, this very much felt like the normal mode version of the fight, just with a crazy difficulty boost. The whole time, all I could really do was cry and hope that he wouldn't ram into me, not only because, gosh, this is so fast, but also, remember, enemies do more damage now, so I die a lot sooner too. That said, I think my favorite boss fight in the whole thing had to be Grand Doomer. I wound up having to cheese it with Spark, which may sound disingenuous, but I haven't had to do that with a Kirby boss fight since Return to Dreamland first came out 10 years ago. And I was just a little baby then. Okay, I was 17, but to me, that's basically like being a baby, right? I love the changes to his attacks and how, for a while, it really felt like the normal mode version of the fight, while still having sprinkles of his extra mode attacks as well. Watching that health bar grow smaller and smaller, wailing on Grand Doomer while, as is common in this game, crying and hoping that I wouldn't die, it felt amazing. But then it got to this point, and Grand Doomer became Grand Doomers. only one of the Doomers can be damaged, and you need to keep your eyes and mind set on which is the real one to actually damage. I, of course, had Spark, so I could always just attack both with one attack and see which one took the real damage. But the issue with using Spark over something that actually deals reasonable damage is that Spark not only made my arms feel like complete wet noodles, but also made the fight go on for much, much longer than it otherwise would have. I died a lot because I kept getting hit by strong attacks, but it never felt like it was totally hopeless. Oh, don't get me wrong, tears were shed, but it never felt impossible. And those moments are when I think the game is at its best. You're facing a brutal challenge, and you know exactly what you have to do to win. You don't get that from Kirby very often, and getting it against a fight like Grand Doomer, where when you're about to win, you get the crazy cool super ability bit at the very end to make you feel like you're in total control, even though your life was in constant danger literally 5 seconds ago, is the rush that hard games are so good at making you feel. So that's all well and good, but what if I told you the hardest thing about this game was not even the boss fights? That's right, here's something more difficult that's dialed up to 11 times 11 you get the point. And of all things, it would be them. And you don't get... Oh, we get parry, though. Please don't be 2. I don't want to have to deal with this again. Please just be 1. No! Oh, it's 2 fires? Kill me. We're gonna be here forever. While the super ability segments didn't see almost anything in the way of changes, the alternate dimensions that they unlocked received heavy adjustments to the Sphere Doomers at the end. That said, I should bring up the occasional moments where copy abilities are forced in the levels preceding the Doomers, and I think they're neat additions. Giving you fire for one of them actually made it easier, but overall, this happens so infrequently that I think of these as nifty and not much more. Although I can't do my Onion Ocean snipe anymore since Sword is required past that point, and that makes me sad. I mean, I guess you can just use like Mennonite or something, but hush and just let me mourn the loss of my half-second time save. But I didn't hold off on talking about the Sphere Doomers for so long because I love this clip. I mean, yeah, I love this clip, but still, that's not the point. The point is, the Sphere Doomers were made absolutely nuts in this, and I love it. Of course, part of the reason is because I find it very funny that, of all things, the Sphere Doomers are the most difficult part of the whole game, but it actually makes going for 100% completion a crazy difficult challenge beyond the exploration aspect. Fully completing Kirby games has always been about exploration, arguably since the original Dreamland, but especially Kirby's Adventure, where the large switches were introduced that unlocked things like mini-games and the Warp Star stations on the world map. Of course, here, the only unlockables are the energy spheres, which unlock ability rooms, challenge stages, and mini-games. I think these are all solid unlockables, and going for 100% is definitely worth it. But for many, you go for 100% not for the reward, but for the challenge. And while the actual finding and puzzle solving is the meat of what makes completing Kirby games interesting, having a game where combat is the core of the difficulty is a refreshing change of pace. Sphere Doomers are the only optional bosses in the whole game, so if at any point you think they're too difficult, you can just leave. Move on, come back when you're better. The challenge exists solely for completion, and optional obstacles for the player to overcome for their own intrinsic gains and values. And sure, by all means, these fights can get absolutely insane, but I love them for that very reason. Before I actually singled out a day to start playing this, the number one thing that I heard people talk about in my Discord is that they'd almost lost to the first Sphere Doomer. As you can see, so did I. But the fun part of this is that most of the people who told me about the Sphere Doomers kept on going. The fights were hard, they were fun, and even though they were optional, people kept trying. That, I think, is the mark of an engaging, difficult game. By far, the most challenging Sphere Doomer encounters are in Onion Ocean, where you need to fight 2 of the Fire Doomers, or 1 normal Doomer and 1 Fire Doomer. That one's tricky too. The Fire Doomers I find the most lethal of all of the Doomers, since not only are their attacks fast, and the hitboxes are huge, almost unfairly so, but with minimal lag I do think they're at least reactable, but also that the abilities you're given are generally rough around the edges. I, of course, exclude Parasol from this. That ability is fine and wonderful and perfect. But your other options, while good, definitely struggle to keep up with the insanity of these fights, especially the one with water on the sides. The corners of the screen are generally pretty safe against the Doomers, since their attacks generally don't reach there, but without these corners, you need to face everything head-on, and you can't rely on guarding, which I relied on a lot for the Sphere Doomers, by the way, which is crazy because in vanilla, it's something that I rarely use considering it's so out of the way on the controller. And while, sure, the other Doomers are all pretty tough, the thrill of challenging these 2 Fire Doomers and, after many deaths, overcoming that challenge and being rewarded with unlockables, which, while Unchanged are still very fun, feels great. The difficulty balancing is so good that you want to go for these unlockables, get every energy sphere, and have a blast the whole time. And while I have my preferences for the levels, I think there's a specific point where the game reaches its peak, and that would be... Alright, that level was really fun. I had a great time with that one. Oh, please get a 1 so I can get... Yes! Okay, that's more lives. Cookie Country and Raisin Ruins were fine. Good introductory levels, they were pretty difficult overall, but all of my deaths here would have happened in the main game anyway. I can be pretty dumb sometimes, understand why my community knows the term Kirby fan choke. I felt similarly when I first played Return to Dreamland 10 years ago. There were fun levels, but I'm not really floored with anything yet. I guess history repeats itself because here we are again, Onion Ocean absolutely flooring me. I talked about the Sphere Doomers already, but seeing Ice's new color palette for the first time, this insane hitbox on Chili, like what? And especially the new puzzle for the first energy sphere left me with a really solid first impression. Again, not much has changed, but from the gameplay perks to the grueling Sphere Doomer fights and the crazy clever first puzzle, which you can clear with Parasol, by the way, you just need to second Wii Remote to become either Mennonite or Bandanity, to visual changes like Spear's new outfit, what? To Ice Kirby's blueness, it all hit like a truck, and I knew I had to keep playing. The second level, having a mini-boss fight early on, was wonderful, but my interest was really piqued with this puzzle here. I can claim all I want to be an analytical mind, but most of the time, the absolute barest of basics jump over my head, much farther than any joke or shark or some third thing. The Sleepy being in the middle was a clear as day sign that I should avoid this, but no. I hit it, decide we're still early into the level, and restart. Challenge Kibbleblade with Cutter, almost die, but I win, and... No. So, I restart again, plug the podcast I am a part of, go subscribe to our podcast, and fight Kibbleblade again. I get a raid on Twitch, and in front of all these new faces, watching Kirby fan play Kirby for the first time, I die. Nah. Fight Kibbleblade again, win, don't mess up, and remind you all once again why the term Kirby fan choke is here to stay. Now, we can go into my chokes for hours. I choked plenty more on this stream, but I don't want the rest of the video to just be me recounting all of the cool things that happened while I went through Onion Ocean. From everything I've said, though, you can piece together how great the level is. Having new things to look at and appreciate is fun and all, but the smart ideas and difficulty I've never experienced in a game like Kirby, especially Return to Dreamland, which, if you haven't figured it out by this point, I've been playing for 10 years, from a franchise I've been playing for 25, dazzled me. By the end of Onion Ocean 2, the mod in its entirety had won me over. So here comes White Wafers, which was even better. The Sphere Doomer fights weren't as hard, but there were still engaging mini-boss fights, new puzzles aplenty, and an entirely different perspective with the increased difficulty. Tragically, White Wafers is when the video quality winds up taking a nosedive, but if you're this far in, I just hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me, please and thank you. Things don't even slow down in Nutty Noon because the trend continues of having a lot of interesting, new puzzles on top of the increased difficulty, changing how you navigate the levels. Nutty Noon being very vertical, it challenges your use of floating, and while the floating itself I'll wind up critiquing later, I rather like how Nutty Noon went mostly unchanged. It added a new layer to the world that I wasn't at all expecting, although this is slightly hampered by the fact that Wing still grants you infinite flight. Just like in the vanilla game, you always want Wing, I guess. This all caps off excellently with, like I mentioned before, my favorite fight in the game against Grand Doomer. Chat telling me that there would be 2 Grand Doomers purely as a joke, only for it to actually happen and crush my soul in real time, is a top tier streaming moment and will stick forever, and really cemented just how much fun Revenge of Dreamland can be. If Onion Ocean had won me over, and White Wafers had accentuated that, finishing Nutty Noon was when I realized that maybe, just maybe, this truly was something special. So that's all she wrote, right? Fantastic mod. I could recommend this to anybody looking for a challenge. Your specs need to be up to snuff, or you should play on an actual hardware, but otherwise, smooth sailing all across, right? I do so wish it were that simple. I did thoroughly enjoy my time with this, but I definitely can't say I enjoyed the full thing. Look out, everyone, because Kirby fans about to crash the Good Field Times party with the critique car. The critique car. I'll keep this section brief since, while these are things that do annoy me, they're not that bad. In a regular game, I might be more annoyed with some of these, but for a free fan-made project, I think I can let these points go. To start off strong, let's take a look at my hottest Kirby take of all, Triple Deluxe not being that great. I knew I would fit this in the video somehow. A part of my complaint comes down to the pace of the game being very slow. Don't worry, Revenge overall has great pacing, but among us, the problems are the mini-boss fights, in particular, the ones where the mini-bosses go into the background. Or at least Bonkers. Here, Bonkers was given the invincible spin into the background attack from Triple Deluxe, and with the health bars being giant, these fights grew to be pretty annoying at times, doubly so for Super Bonkers. But the primary offender is the same mini-boss I really didn't like on my first Return to Dreamland playthrough. Again, funny how history repeats itself. Dubier. Back then, I didn't know how to quickly beat bosses, so it was dubious. But here, there are a few more problems, in particular having a lot of attacks that move way too fast and have no indication on where they're going to go. It exists purely as a gotcha kind of thing, which adds nothing and is just really annoying. Also, if you float too high up to avoid the attack, this happens. I recreated this 2 more times in the playthrough. It is consistent. Despite the mod being well put together overall, more glitches are present here than in the original Return to Dreamland, at least ones that you're casually going to find. My favorite has to be that if you get eaten by one of the big eels, you're invincible for the entirety of whatever room you're in, only deactivating when you enter a door. That's just hilarious. I found a few others while messing around, but while some are more annoying than others, worst case scenario, they're just pace breakers. Now, if we're going to talk about things that are worse than pace breakers, this is still like the worst nerf I can think to give Condor Head. A little bit of cooldown, like right there. Why? There's like no point, it doesn't change, whatever. Putting Revenge of Dreamland aside for a second, what makes Kirby games fun? A big part of that, regardless of who you ask, is Kirby himself. He's among the most... I already made the Among Us joke, you don't have to worry. Among Us, the most versatile characters in any video game. Whereas your Marios and your Sonics limit what their characters can do, Kirby not only gives the player absolute power, but also total free reign with the copy abilities to experiment with changes to this god among Ds and discover naturally what they like the most. A lot of that holds true here, but some changes were made to Kirby and the abilities that I wasn't really crazy about. For one that I was initially very excited over, Kirby's infinite float was removed, more akin to something you'd see in Kirby 64. While, sure, I'd love to see something like this be difficult even with Kirby's infinite float in mind, I can't fault the game for taking an approach that isn't my own. There's no infinite flight, it's designed around it, does it work? And by that, I don't mean, does it function properly, because the answer to that is actually not always. If you time it wrong, Kirby won't be able to float at all, and this screwed me over so many times, and I have to assume that it's an unintentional bug, but I'll label that as a problem and move on. For the most part, I ended up thinking that it didn't really add very much. Return to Dreamland in general does a good job of encouraging you not to just float over everything. It's a slow move, most of your options are on the ground. It's a slow move, there are typically enemies in the air, and did I mention that floating in Return to Dreamland is really slow? What I find much better is puffing up, immediately releasing for that air puff, which is the actual good part of floating, and repeating. This was not nerfed at all, and while it isn't a game changer, neither is having infinite flight, at least for this game, for the reasons already stated. Super Inhale, meanwhile, was left totally unchanged, and this is why the modifications to something like unlimited floating just kind of confuse me. I love the Sphere Doomer fights in this game, but at some point I realized that a very easy way to cheese, like, most if not all of them is to simply hide in a corner, super inhale, and stop to occasionally guard if they get close. This trivializes many of them, even without an ability, and while the same can certainly be said in vanilla Return, it's far slower and much more tedious than any alternative. Because of the other system changes that we'll get into later, this wound up being one of the best, safest, and honestly even in some cases fastest options out of all of them, a move that normal copy abilityless Kirby always has. Actually, let's get into some of the system changes now that wind up making Super Inhale really good. Enemies, for the most part, have received much stronger offense. The Waddle Dees are still innocent, wholesome creatures, but almost every other enemy does much more damage, while Kirby hasn't seen a health increase at all. By itself, totally fine in my book, but the damage modifications have a secondary effect that not too many would think of. In Return to Dreamland, what decides if Kirby keeps his ability when he gets hit is the damage of what he got hit with. Get hit by something weak, you keep your ability. Something strong, you lose it. What this means is that almost every enemy and every boss and mini-boss make you lose your ability on touch. This adds a fair bit of challenge and a whole lot of tedium. Look, I grew up with Kirby's Adventure, Nightmare in Dreamland, Amazing Mirror, Squeak Squad, Canvas Curse, all games that punish you for getting hit by anything with losing your ability. There are some key differences between those games and this, but I'll focus on the two most important. First, they're much easier, so getting hit feels less like part of the experience and more of a wake-up call. Like, you can't just breeze through this game, you have to put some level of effort in here. More importantly though, in tandem with another mechanic change, Kirby doesn't have nearly as many invincibility frames after getting hit, which can lead to some nasty scenarios, can result in abilities being more of a liability than an asset. If I could go back and tell past Kirby fans something, first I'd tell her to get some tissues ready for all the panic crying she'd be going through, but also to just give up on trying to use abilities, especially against the Sphere Doomers. Getting hit by basically anything makes you lose your ability anyway, and trying to get it back can just end up adding more damage. So why worry about the balancing act of all these options when you can just stay away from a boss and any danger at all and use Super Inhale when needed? Yeah, it's slower, but it's much safer in a game that punishes you hard for making even one single mistake. I know I make a big fuss about speedrunning on this channel, but not everything is about speedrunning, especially in a hard mode. To add salt to the wound, a lot of copy abilities wound up receiving changes too. Some of them are cool and visual, like Spark being green and Cutter's hat being different, and some of them even have gameplay changes that I'm pretty okay with. Tornado lasting less was a good call. Tornado fans cry over this nerf while Parasol fans stay winning because nothing got changed. But the changes that, to repeat what I said earlier, confuse me are the ones made to the dash attacks. Needle's dash attack practically had its startup completely removed at the cost of invincibility and the ability to break star blocks. I don't see why Needle, of all abilities, really needed the balancing, especially considering this dash attack can only be used on the ground. But hey, removing invincibility from dash attacks, but making them faster, isn't a bad idea. I actually kind of like it. Wait, they changed nothing about Ice's dash attack? Same distance, same damage, same invincibility? Well, okay, maybe the nerfs only happened to the abilities that you see a lot in the speedrun. And Needle. Like Wing. We all know my personal history with Wing, especially with Condor Head, the dash attack. And a small bit of end lag was added to it that basically changed nothing. And hey, on the note of abilities that are used a lot during the runs, Fire had no changes made to Burning at all. I don't know, it's just these changes feel so random. There's very little in the way of meaningful buffs, and while most abilities didn't receive any major changes, the ones that did range from being totally serviceable in a vacuum to not really making sense. Towards the end of the game, I found myself questioning the changes made to abilities much more than I did earlier on. And okay, a part of that was definitely having a better understanding of the system changes made from Vanilla Return, but that wasn't the only reason I started noticing this more. Another complaint involved... But I appreciate it, I'm just so happy it's over. I'm so happy that's over. Like, Magolor Phase 1, it was tough, it was annoying, whatever, but not too bad. That felt like it took time out of, like, my life. That was not enjoyable. But it's over. It's over. I said this before, but while I can't say that Cookie Country or Raisin Ruins really wowed me, I had a fun time with them. They were a solid introduction to Revenge of Dreamland before I fell in love with Onion Ocean, which beat the heck out of me. White Wafers and Nutty Noon proceeded to do the same, and going into Egg Engines, I was stoked. I booted the game up for one last stream before I typed up this script, got everything ready, and oh hey, they changed the background. That's pretty neat. Unfortunately, that's kind of what stood out the most to me about Egg Engines. Aside from an occasional spark, I wasn't impressed. It wasn't bad by any means, but it all felt so similar to Return to Dreamland. And like, at this point in the game, I understand how it works so well, and there aren't as many changes compared to the vanilla game as there were before. Dangerous Dinner had even less. Maybe there was a new puzzle once or twice, and getting to use Vorpal Blade is fun, but it doesn't feel like much has changed. But then, something kinda crazy happens. The game gets really fun again. The Landia fight isn't amazing, but it's still a lot of fun, and very different compared to the original game. You start another dimension, and find that the shoot 'em up got way harder. More enemies, each of whom have more health, of course, and tighter windows to dodge their attacks kept me on my toes throughout the whole thing. But the real scare came at the end of the first section where, what else would pop up other than a Sphere Doomer? Thankfully, all of the trauma they've caused me, I have them figured out, and I managed to beat this one as well as the next duo Sphere Doomer fight, no problem. Then Magolor pulls out the Lore Star Cutter, and this fight has some crazy changes made to it. Some that made me use Landia's invincible spinning attack for a reason that had nothing to do with speedrunning. I was very impressed, but more importantly, I was having some serious fun. Finally, after an underwhelming endgame, the mod that I was won over by so quickly was reminding me why I loved it so much. And then... Actually, okay, before I wind up rambling, Magolor, as in the Phase 1 fight, not Magolor's soul, is certainly tough, kind of annoying even, but nothing I feel like I'd get super mad about. Being so close to the end definitely made me feel impatient, which cost me, but I wouldn't call this bad or anything. I used Spark, and then used some super abilities, and then I won. Simple enough. Hit basically every note that stuck with me, except for all the deaths. We don't have to talk about those, right?
Magolor Soul, on the other hand.
That really frustrated me. Some of the things I've already whined about are here and accounted for. Huge health bar, attacks that are way too fast, moves you can't possibly hope to avoid unless you've already seen them. The problem with these is that they're dialed up to 11 times 11. I forgot how much I said 11 before. It's a lot. And as much as I hate to admit this, I gotta say, the lag actually helped me out here. I think I would have had a lot more deaths if the game was running at a proper pace. Although the music would be playing normally instead of, I don't know, whatever this is. I have some other issues, like how tight the window is for dodging some of his attacks even after you know how to dodge them, or the visuals on some of the attacks here making them really confusing and unintuitive to dodge. But in the interest of time, the most frustrating thing is that, while you have to deal with all of this, Magolor's soul loves to chill in the background constantly and barrage you with his attacks. He does this in the original game too, and the difficulty increase of the attacks, while annoying, isn't specifically the major issue here. The problem is that he spends as much time in the background as Pyribbit does. Oh yeah, I went there. So much of this fight turned into a waiting game, and for a fight that you'll be dying to a lot due to the difficulty, it's very frustrating. With one or two exceptions, it's not like these are really all that hard to dodge. But because of everything I mentioned, on top of the fact that he loves being in the background so much, you start hearing Pyribbit noises in your head because of all the times that you've tried to run the arena in that game and he is just constantly making you spend so... The fight simply drags. It isn't fun or engaging. It's hard for all of the wrong reasons in the best case, and a slow, tedious, and annoying drag at worst. I hate to say it, but it was a very bad way to end this adventure. Of course I did. Most of this video was me talking about how amazing it was and that you should totally play it. Why did I even make this a part of the video? Channel regulars know that, while Kirby is my favorite thing, I'm also really into Fire Emblem. Mods like this are pretty commonplace for most Fire Emblem games, and while not all of them are that great or even finished, most, if not all, of these shine because of the passion from a community that loves the franchise. You'll never hear me say I love The Last Promise, for example, but I respect the heck out of it. Revenge of Dreamland hits on that same kind of note, but in a community that doesn't see full-on mods like this very often, based on a game I like more than any Fire Emblem game, with a mod that excellently handles most of what it sets out to do. I give the people behind the scenes a lot of credit, doing all of this difficult work for zero profit, and while I don't think that it makes it immune to criticism, a part of me does want to go a bit softer on it because of that. Really, the only thing about this that I hated so much to where I don't really care is Magolor's soul, which is very unfortunate considering it's the very end of the game. I don't want to repeat too much of what I said before, so if you're here just for the final verdict and nothing else, well, thank you for watching the video anyway. I appreciate your support. While I would certainly only recommend playing this if you know you'll be playing on something strong enough to handle it, that recommendation still comes very strong. If you think that Kirby games are too easy, or you just want a challenge, or Kirby and the Forgotten Land is coming and the wait is driving you crazy, play this. It is what you want and more. It may be too much more at times, but all the same. Hey, thank you so much for watching until the end of the video. If you liked what you saw and you don't mind hearing me repeat myself, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, ringing the notification bell and all to help me out. It's all free and gets me one step closer to being able to give you all videos like this more regularly. Follow me on Twitch if you want to chat, or join my Discord server if that tickles your fancy. The links to both are in the description. Until I see you next, I have been Kirby Fan. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video. Bye!